Hey guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today I will be explaining you 3 true horror stories that may scare you. So before diving into this video, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get notifications of our upcoming videos. So let's begin. The first story is from Mr. Ramu, who's a bus driver and is 47 years old. He claimed that his son returned from the hereafter. Let's listen to his story. The Dead Visitor Incident. I don't know where to begin. I can't even bring myself to tell you this story. The memory is too painful. We had a son, Raj. He was a filial son, a good boy. After completing his education, he found a good job. He would come straight home every day after work, but all that was to change. He started to mix with the wrong company, a bunch of thugs. I think they were his ex-army friends. They were a bad influence on my son, always dragging him out of the house at night to drink. Sometimes he would come home drunk and we'd have a terrible row. Once I even threatened to throw him out of the house. He cried and begged for forgiveness. He said he'd change, that he wouldn't go drinking again. Oh, how I wished he had kept his word, but it was not to be. That fateful night, we received unexpected visitors. The police. They informed us that our son had been involved in a fatal accident. Apparently, he was on his way home in a car driven by one of his friends. They were all believed to be under the influence of alcohol. There were no survivors. It was a terrible accident. The police estimated the time of death to be around 1 in the morning. My son's body was badly smashed up, his head almost severed from his body. I had to go and claim his body, but I was warned I wouldn't be able to recognize my son. His body was mangled, his face crushed to a bloody pulp. My wife fainted at the news. She couldn't take the strain. I had to go alone. I wished I had never seen my son's body. No father should ever see the mangled, broken corpse of his child. It was too much to bear. I broke down. His dangling head was attached to his body and just a thin silver of gristle and tissue. His crushed and bloodied eyeballs popped out of their sockets. His nose and mouth were nothing more than 2 gaping holes, the cartilage and teeth missing. I quickly made arrangements to have my son's body cremated. I didn't want my wife to see him this way, but she insisted, pleading hysterically. I stood firm. I knew she couldn't bear the horror of seeing our son's mangled corpse. I tried to explain to her, calm her down, but it was no use. She was overcome by grief. She kept calling out to my son. The funeral was a hasty affair. I wanted it over fast. Only family members were notified. I performed all the rituals myself. It was a great tragedy. The next few days were very difficult for both my wife and I. We had to cope with the loss of our only son. It was all so sudden. Now he was gone. My wife refused to accept our son's death. She kept calling out his name, begging him to return. It pained me seeing my wife grieving, but nothing we could do would bring our son back. He was dead, gone. At least, that's what I thought. On the 3rd night following his death, something strange happened. It was about 1 a.m. when we heard knocking on our front door. We were puzzled. Who could that be at such a late hour? I went to answer the door looking through the peephole, but there was no one there. Did we imagine it? I was about to return to the bedroom when there was another knocking on the door. This time, it was louder, more urgent. Someone was pounding furiously on the door, almost breaking it down. I cursed under my breath. I thought it was someone's idea of a prank. I'd give them a piece of my mind. I rushed to the door and swung it open. But again, there was no one there. My wife called out to me, "Who's at the door, Ramu?" She was afraid. I replied, "No one. It's a mistake. Go back to sleep." But I wasn't so sure. I was about to close the door when I heard it. My son's voice. It was a whisper. I stopped dead in my tracks, leaving the door open. It uttered my name softly, a hint of sadness and remorse in his voice. I stared out into the empty corridor, half expecting to see my son. But there was no one there. Suddenly, a cold draft brushed up beside me, giving me goose flesh. Every nerve in my body tingled. Did my son come back from the dead? I stood there motionless for several minutes until my wife came looking for me. "What's the matter, Ramu?" she asked, noticing the pained, confused expression on my face. I couldn't take it anymore. I held her to me and wept. I was convinced my son had come back to visit us. Perhaps he wanted to say how sorry he was for what had happened, or maybe he wanted to say goodbye to his mother and I for the last time. The very next day, we engaged a priest to conduct some prayers to ensure smooth passage of my son's soul over to the other side. He never returned again. Next story is from Miss Rosetta, who is a female secretary and is 22 years old. The bizarre beetle incident. You're probably not going to believe me when I tell you what happened to me a few years back. And I don't blame you. I still have difficulty trying to deal with it. I just can't explain it. It all happened one night. I was sitting in the living room watching television. Suddenly, I noticed a huge black beetle fly in through the window. It fluttered around the room for a while, then attached itself to the ceiling, just above me. I'm normally not afraid of bugs, but this particular insect gave me the creeps. It had a strange green and red marking on its back. I had never seen anything like it before. As I was in the middle of a program, I decided to ignore the critter. Perhaps it might just fly away. No such luck. It remained fixed on the wall. And I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but it seemed to be staring at me. I couldn't concentrate on the show anymore. I got up, switched off the TV, and went into my bedroom and closed the door. Thankfully, the beetle stayed in the living room. I reckoned by the next morning it would be gone. That night, I had a terrible nightmare. I dreamt I had been cut and was bleeding profusely, but my blood was black. I awoke with a start. I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my leg. I looked down, and to my horror, I found the black beetle gorging on blood from my leg. I tried to flick it off, but it stuck fast to my leg. Its proboscis dug deep into my veins. Blood was streaming down my leg. The pain was excruciating. I reached down and pulled hard, tearing the beetle off my leg, but I couldn't hold on to it. It just flew away and vanished. I noticed a gush of blood run from the gaping wound. I raced to the bathroom to clean it, but the wound was quite deep. I had to bandage it. I couldn't believe an insect had done this. The next day, I felt violently ill. I had a high fever and felt so weak. I consulted a doctor. He treated the wound which had gotten infected. He too was incredulous that a beetle could have caused such a wound. But things only got worse. As the days went by, I only got sicker. The wound didn't heal. In fact, it got worse. I lost a lot of weight and could barely climb out of bed each day. I couldn't even work. My family was worried. What was happening to me? Even my doctor was baffled. Then one night, it happened again. I dreamt that I was being chased by a creature. It had bitten me and blood was oozing from my body as I ran. With each step, the creature grew nearer. I awoke, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to see. A black figure sat crouched at the foot of my bed, its naked torso hunched over my legs, and it was licking my wound with its long tongue. It turned to look at me and smiled, licking its lips. And then, right before my eyes, it vanished. I screamed. My parents came racing into my room. "What's the matter?" they asked. I couldn't speak. I was in tears, shaking with fear. After I had calmed down a little, I told them what had happened. They looked at one another, their faces grim. They knew now what was causing all my problems. I was a victim of black magic. My mother hugged and reassured me. "Don't worry, tomorrow we'll take you to see a Bomo. He will cure you." The Bomo was an old man. One look at my wound and he knew exactly what was wrong. He smoked my leg with benzoin incense and applied a yellowish paste into the wound. He then covered it with some leaves and bound it. He then turned to my parents and said, "Now we shall see who did this to your daughter." He started chanting some prayers and went into a trance. He then stared into a bowl of sacred water. He seemed to be mumbling something to himself. He then chanted some incantations and broke out his trance. He revealed all. "One of your male colleagues did this to you. He was in love with you, but you spurned him. He did this out of spite. Had this carried on for 7 weeks, you'd be dead. The demon, jinn, he sent would have sucked out your Samangat life force. But don't worry, he will not harm you again. I've sent the demon back again." He said he sent the jinn back to attack his owner. In a few days he will come to you begging your forgiveness. True to the Bomo's word, my colleague came to my house to beg my forgiveness. He had admitted his actions. He was pale and looking sickly. Apparently, the jinn was now feeding on his blood. He told me that if I forgive him, he'd resign from work and never bother me again. I did forgive him. The third story is from Mrs. June Teo, who is a female sole properties owner and is 30 something. Let's listen to her story. The Black Intruders Incident. I'm about to tell you the scariest experience of my life. I don't know if this qualifies as a ghost story, but one thing's for sure. Whatever happened was evil and had something to do with black magic. I had taken a holiday trip to Bali alone. I was definitely feeling the effects of being overworked and underpaid. I just needed to get away from it all, for a while at least. I booked into a nice hotel upon a river. It was a 3-story building, very quaint. There was a greenery all around. In fact, the place was surrounded by broad, looming trees, almost shielding the hotel from view. I smiled contentedly, thinking I was in for a private, restful break. Little did I know I was to experience the horror of my life. That night, as I was preparing for bed, I felt pretty strange. I felt as if I was being watched by unseen eyes from outside of my window, but I was 3 floors up. There was nothing out there but darkness. Just the silhouette of trees swaying in the breeze, conjuring eerie shadows and shapes. I felt uneasy, afraid. Maybe it was because I was alone in the unfamiliar place, and unlike the bright and busy evenings in Singapore, here the night was still, dark, and silent. It was as if the night was holding its breath, waiting. I told myself I was being silly. Of course, my imagination running wild. I tried to go to sleep, crawling into bed, pulling the bed covers up to my chin. I wanted to leave the bedside lamp on, but the glare irritated my eyes and I switched it off. This plunged the room into total darkness and silence. All of a sudden, the room went cold, very cold, and it wasn't aircon. I had switched it off. My hairs stood on ends. Then I heard it. There was a tapping on my window. I froze. There was a tapping on my window. I froze, beads of cold perspiration pouring down my face. Who was at the window? Then I heard a creaking sound, as if someone was trying to force open the window. I could hardly move, my muscles paralyzed with fear, yet I strained and fumbled to reach for the bedside lamp. I flicked the switch on, but it wasn't working. My terror was growing. Then it happened. The windows flew open and 2 hulking, gleaming silhouettes leapt into my room and crouched on the floor, waiting to pounce. Even in the darkness, I could just make out their appearance. They looked like bald, black men with bloodshot eyes that were staring right at me. They seemed to be naked and covered in an oily, black substance. Before I could let out a scream, they sprang onto my bed, their arms clasped tightly together, like Siamese twins. One figure held me down while the other reached for my left arm and pulled it over the side of the bed. The one on top of me clamped my mouth shut with one hand. I struggled to break free, but it was hopeless. They were too strong. Then, in low, droning voices, they started to chant some kind of Malay, or rather Javanese incantation. Then the one on top of me muttered something, and before I knew it, the other one bit my hand and started to suck on the blood. This was all too much for me. In desperation, I prayed, sobbing hysterically. Then I blacked out. When I came to my senses, the room was empty. The bedside lamp was on. I turned to look at the window. It was closed. It's as if nothing had ever happened. Did I imagine it all? Was it a nightmare? But I felt so weak. Then I remembered the bite. I raised my left arm and saw two puncture wounds on my forearm, but there was no blood. It looked as if the one was licked clean. Slowly, I got up from my bed to check my belongings. Nothing was taken. The intruders were obviously not burglars. But who or what were they? Were they human, spirits, or demons? Mrs. June said as she finished the story. That's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. The three stories were pretty interesting and horrific.